When your home doesn't want you anymore, the stars might be your only refuge and your greatest challenge. One of the most common topics on this show is space colonization, heading out to settle strange new worlds under alien suns. But part of that conversation is asking not just about the technical aspects of how to journey to a new world, build settlements, and terraform that planet, or forge that space habitat. It is also about the motivations and forces in play causing people to settle in space. But what happens when the urge to leave is not entirely your choice? When exile, not exploration, is the driving force behind colonization? And could this end up being the primary motivation for settlement? On the one hand, there are a lot of inherent human psychological factors that press us to explore and colonize new places. Evolution tends to produce creatures that grow, explore, and expand, and humanity as a whole has a strong tendency to look over that next horizon, pioneer the frontier, and build new homes and civilizations. Humanity's restless spirit has always been its compass, pointing toward uncharted horizons and untold challenges. Our willingness to tackle and overcome these challenges is part of what makes us great. On the other hand, space is unimaginably vast, and the times and energies involved in traveling to these new frontiers are beyond merely huge. I don't doubt that we will settle this solar system, but the distance to the nearest star is over 200,000 times the distance to the nearest planet. But interstellar travel doesn't just test our technology, it tests our willpower, patience, and the strength of our collective imagination and commitment. Without faster-than-light travel, which seems impossible under known science, lifetimes will be spent traveling to even the nearest stars, and messages will take years to relay. This is unlike planets where even the most distant ones, like Pluto, can still send a message and receive a reply from Earth in under a day. Near the end of the episode, we'll walk through a number of hypothetical fictional scenarios in this solar system and beyond, and see how that and other factors could potentially play a big role in a colony's origin and development. Expanding your empire by settling a solar system is plausible. Expanding it by settling neighboring star systems is a lot more dubious. The great cost to send such missions, and for little return, dampens the desire to fund them. We can easily imagine a handful of expeditions being sent to settle our nearest neighboring systems, Alpha Centauri and others. But beyond that, with the goal accomplished to prove it can be done, you've checked the box for prestigious accomplishment and have few other incentives for entities thinking of funding these efforts. We do tend to assume that a vastly more prosperous and automated society makes funding these efforts easier, but it's hard to say for sure. Even if they have the capability, they may prefer other uses for their resources. On the other side of that, we have to ask what motivates people to leave behind a civilization of great prosperity for a century-long voyage to a dead and barren wasteland of a planet. Building a future among the stars is no picnic. It's a marathon of ingenuity, resilience, and sheer stubbornness. But again, we have a natural drive to explore and pioneer, and when we discuss big generational arc ships on this show, we often note just how much luxury they can still bring along. So too, for some, the chance to pioneer a new world isn't just hardship, it's a calling, a chance to escape Earth's limitations and create something entirely their own. And yet it is a great and prolonged hardship, one that isn't just for an individual but presumably their whole family too, for generations to come. So we ask ourselves what, beyond those first few prestige efforts like colonizing Alpha Centauri, would drive a homeland to fund a colonization effort and would fuel volunteers for it. One possible reason would be to send people into exile, to get rid of troublemakers while giving them their own new home to fight for, win, and build in their image. Today we'll be examining this motivation and asking if it makes sense and what these colonies would be like. But we may want to begin by asking what exile is. Exile, at its core, refers to the state of being borrowed from one's homeland, either as punishment or due to necessity, often enforced by a governing authority. The term originates from the Latin word exilum, meaning banishment, and historically it has encompassed both voluntary and involuntary forms. Voluntary exile might involve individuals leaving their homeland to escape persecution, avoid conflict, or pursue personal freedom. In contrast, forced exile often involves being expelled under threat, leaving no choice but to comply. You can have a mix of both, too. Exile can therefore carry a wide range of connotations, from a noble self-imposed quest to a punishment designed to strip someone of their identity and community. But while exile may begin as a punishment, it often ends as a story of resilience and reinvention. We've looked at space colonies founded by prisoners and rebel colonies. An exiled colony is similar to the latter, but might be where rebels are sent, as opposed to a colony that later rebelled. We might ask about the realism of exiled colonies, but history provides plenty of examples of colonies made up of people who are either in exile or encouraged to leave. Certainly my own home in the US has a history of folks arriving here as some sort of exile, self-imposed or enforced. History is rich with many more examples of exile as a tool for punishment and possibility. Whether it was ancient Rome banishing political rivals or England sending convicts to Australia, space offers the same opportunity, but on a far grander and more isolating scale. There are good reasons why this might happen. Even if your civilization is ethically comfortable with executing political dissidents, which it might be, it probably has a fairly high bar for resorting to such measures. On the other hand, let's be honest, most people have a political party or faction they not only align with, but also one they particularly dislike, and would rather not share a country with. That, however, is or should be a very long step from wanting them all killed. From a practical standpoint, even if executions or purges were considered, most people wouldn't tolerate that. Moreover, such actions would alienate friends and family members of those targeted, even if they don't share the same beliefs. There's another side to this discussion. An exiled planet is not necessarily devoted to a single banished ideology. Even if it were, its founders likely included family members who weren't as devoted to the cause but supported their relatives, or people intrigued by the potential of a new world but less invested in its ideology. Even among those fully committed to the cause, their children might not be, and their grandchildren and great-grandchildren even less so. Colonizing planets is the work of generations, and not just a handful of them. Thus, it's very believable that many colonies will be funded or founded by groups devoted to specific political, religious, or ideological beliefs. Yet such endeavors often receive support from others, not only because exiling a problematic group to a planet 100 light-years away seems like a solution, but also because they assume it would take millennia for the colony to develop the infrastructure and population to pose any sort of threat. By that time, both the exiles and the society that sent them away will likely have changed significantly. Space colonies are likely to be expensive endeavors, so you might wonder why on Earth you would waste huge amounts of money gifting some group you don't like with those opportunities and resources to get off Earth. The simple answer is right there. They will likely believe their beliefs are sound and logical and will prosper and continue if given a fair shot on a blank slate of a new world. I dare say most of us think that about whatever socioeconomic, religious, or political views we hold, so they are likely to accept that challenge. Every great endeavor begins with a dream, a plan, and often a healthy dose of desperation. Meanwhile, the civilizational faction in charge that thinks they are a problem, dangerous, or nuts, is figuring they will eventually be forced to accept reality when off on a new world with no one but themselves to blame when they attempt to enact those policies and supposedly crash and burn, and for good or ill do so and either succeed amazingly or turn into a dumpster fire and presumably change their policies. In the vast silence of space, communication and entertainment become even more crucial. Whether you're working in a remote asteroid outpost or enjoying the long solitude of an exiled space colony, having reliable audio can make all the difference. That's why I love my Raycon everyday earbuds. They are lightweight, snug, and built to stay in place, so you can listen in any environment or activity. Whether you need active noise isolation to block out distractions, or awareness mode to stay tuned in to your surroundings, Raycon lets you switch with just a quick tap. And let's talk about battery life, because if you're on a long-haul interstellar trip, or just stuck in traffic, you don't want to keep recharging. Raycon gives you 32 hours of battery life, plus a quick charge feature that gives you 90 minutes of playback with just 10 minutes of charging. and with multi-point connectivity, you can seamlessly switch between devices without the hassle. Plus, Raycons are weatherproof, incredibly durable, and come in multiple stylish colors. I've actually washed mine twice and they still work. They're excellent earbuds, and Raycon offers a 30-day happiness guarantee, so there's zero risk in trying them out. And best of all, Raycon's premium audio comes at half the price of other top brands, so you get fantastic sound without the premium price tag. Go to buyraycon.com/IsaacArthur to get 20% off the best-selling everyday earbuds. That's buyraycon.com/IsaacArthur for 20% off your order. Check them out today. Right or wrong, many a parent seen a teenager storm out, many a tribe that divided in two, and many a church that schismed had folks thinking, good riddance. And I'm sure an awful lot of space colonies will find a lot of their pioneers that way. Every space colony begins as an investment, and sometimes a gamble, on what humanity might become. It makes a lot of sense to fund that part of the investment with folks you'd rather see the backside of, who are just as happy to leave, rather than our earlier default to send the best of the best, the cream of the crop, to plant in alien soil. There is a definite difference between that and exile, though much as a colony founded by prisoners in general is different from one made specifically of exiles. Those exiles might be technically voluntary or even enthusiastic, but the implication is they were getting on board that ship one way or another, and if they want a third option, it might involve being planted in the ground. High-tech civilizations might tend to prefer this approach too because civil war, in terms of actual battle, is almost unthinkable. If you're fighting a war, especially with modern hyper-destructive weaponry, it is a really good idea to try to do that on someone else's property, because that property is going to get very damaged, possibly to the point of glowing in the dark if the atom bombs come out. Civil wars are rarely very civil, but often somewhat restrained by both sides, being aware that everything getting wrecked is theirs, or belong to folks who might have been allies or neutral before and now are feeling vengeful. Both scenarios can also cause famines in a modern or futuristic world of centralized agriculture and logistics, meaning you're often going to deprive or kill just as many of your own people in the long run if you get into a civil war, and likely also upset your neighbors who may be harmed or fear harm or even see an opportunity to snip off your land for new territory for themselves. Spaceships certainly are not cheap, but neither are cities. Spacefaring civilizations able to afford to send out exiles to space colonies are likely already also building space habitats. These habitats are hardly fragile constructs, but they also aren't great places to host nuclear wars, let alone some of the higher tech scenarios that might make a mere mushroom cloud seem like a welcome sight in comparison, at least until your eyes burned out. For my part, I tend to think more high-tech civilizations will trend toward being more ethical. I could be wrong about that, but if the future is some Orwellian nightmare, it isn't one that supports exiled colonies either. If your society is built on brainwashing and propaganda, you do not want your dissidents exiting to some distant lands you cannot control. You want them re-educated or recycled. So for today, we are assuming that whoever carried out the exiling was at least a little less evil and authoritarian than the Oceania of Orwell's 1984. There's also the flip side to exile, as it can be enforced, voluntary, or some mix of those two, but it often includes a desire to return or maintain a connection to one's homeland. This might be an initial contributing factor, but centuries of distance in both time and space would seem likely to crush that intent. Moreover, exile strips away the familiar, but also offers a rare opportunity, a blank slate to rebuild identity, culture, and purpose. For some, exile is not a punishment, but an invitation to begin again. And yet we should be mindful that a harsh and hostile new world might cause people to cling to their past, including their grievances, nourishing them on a steady diet of bitterness and spite. It might be pretty justified too, as any new planet is going to be a desolate rock initially, not a paradise like Earth, but one given to exiles might be especially crappy, or at least viewed that way by them. This discontent could persist across generations, especially with the advent of radical life extension, a likely technology of the future that also makes space colonization more feasible. With an indefinite lifespan, the concept of wasting your life on a spaceship or under domes on a barren planet becomes irrelevant. your lifespan effectively becomes a blank check with unlimited funding. For those curious, you might freeze yourself for such journeys or spend time in hibernation while robots handle most of the work terraforming a planet. Small groups could wake in shifts to oversee progress, then return to stasis. However, the ability to freeze people and bring them back requires technology very similar to, or perhaps even more advanced than, that needed for radical life extension. So if you can freeze people, you likely also have the option for indefinite lifespans and might use stasis strategically to minimize resource expenditure or boredom, a currency that might prove invaluable in colonization. Radically extended lifespans aren't likely to be the only improvement people enjoy. Beyond the vast wellspring of knowledge and experience this brings, individuals might gain lifetimes of resilience while retaining the mental and physical vigor of someone in their 20s or 30s. Additionally, they could benefit from a host of minor enhancements, ranging from advanced gadgets and techniques to genetic or cybernetic tweaks, all designed to make them tougher and more effective. Back-breaking labor wouldn't bring them down because their backs wouldn't break. Demoralization, fatigue, or low-energy days could become relics of the past simply from more optimized bodies, gear, and lifestyles. Of all the enhancements people might develop for their minds, the ability to dial down boredom when needed would likely be extremely popular. While it's not entirely fair to call humanity fidgety by nature, being able to sit and focus for hours when required is undeniably useful. It's not about turning patience into a default state, but about having the ability to harness it when beneficial. I would not be surprised if enhancements or devices to assist with that became common. After all, patience is a virtue, especially when it comes to reaching and taming new planets. Impatience can be handy too, but it would be nice to be able to decide not to experience either for a bit when you know it is necessary. Of course, if patience is a virtue you have mastered, you might also subscribe to the idea that revenge is a dish best served cold. After harboring grudges for centuries, you might feel quite justified in sending an attack fleet back to your homeworld, especially if there are still people alive there who were around when you were exiled. And stories grow with the telling even when the people who experienced those events are still around. Colonists may pass their grudges down to future generations, ensuring that animosities remain alive even after centuries. This could shape the colony's long-term goals, including potential retaliation against their homeworld or ideological adversaries. This could infect even those colonists who will complete volunteers or exiled for some other reasons. And while anger might not be the most desirable motivation for doing things, it can fuel efforts and inspire ideas. Now, would you actually man a colony fleet entirely with exiles? Quite possibly. After all, if many of the colonists shared a common grudge, that sentiment could easily spread to the rest of the fleet, even if they did not initially share it. A small loyalist contingent placed in charge might eventually change their minds, lose their influence, or even find themselves pushed out of power, or, in worst-case scenarios, out of an airlock. This is not to say someone might not try to send a ship full of exiles to a new world under the leadership of a loyal governor, or include charters with constitutions that explicitly prohibit attacking or invading their homeland. Governments and large organizations aren't known for their strict adherence to the practical and logical, after all. Such measures might even be effective, especially in an automated society with extensive AI support. A ship captain, fleet admiral, or planetary governor equipped with advanced technology could potentially enforce loyalty with minimal manpower. The presence of WMDs and robot armies drastically changes the equation of traditional rebellion. Oversight could also be delegated to an AI programmed for loyalty. However, as we explored in Machine Monitors, while AIs can be made highly reliable, they are not infallible, especially over long periods. A possible solution might be to put such overseers into hibernation, allowing lower systems to handle most day-to-day operations. That same approach can also be applied to human overseers. The individuals with access to the metaphorical launch codes could spend much of their time in hibernation, minimizing their influence by daily life or even their other loyalist peers, and reducing the chance of their loyalty wavering. For added security, you might send 100 loyalists and rotate 3 of them at a time into active duty, chosen randomly each period to prevent collusion. You can even include a preset timeline or set of conditions for when that period of rule would end. We discussed this in our episode Life as a Planetary Governor, where the Fleet Admiral effectively ran things until arrival, and then the Planetary Governor had near absolute control under the original charter. This control lasted until the settlement reached 10 million people, at which point they could draft and vote on a new constitution, or multiple constitutions the colony split into separate nations. People are generally more accepting of temporary and focused despotism when it comes with clear limits and a veto option. For instance, a committee with full control over infrastructural decisions until all initial habitation domes are completed might be tolerable, as long as their decisions could be overridden by a supermajority vote from the colonists. In any event, whether such an approach would work or be ethical does not necessarily determine whether people will attempt it when designing and populating colony missions and fleets. There is also the concern that a quasi-voluntary mission, like this, could raise fears of something far darker, such as all the dissidents being loaded onto a colony ship only to be sent into the sun. More plausibly, the ship could simply vent its occupants into space, while an AI responds to correspondence from home, sending fabricated updates and notes to maintain the illusion of a functioning colony. Ultimately, this is the same credible commitment problem that arises in any civil war scenario. If one side agrees to surrender to the other with promises of clemency once they lay down their weapons, what's to stop the other side from betraying them shortly afterward? Often they can find an official excuse too, as some individual is likely to break the treaty. How does either side truly trust the other to fulfill their end of the bargain? The issue becomes even more pronounced when building a colony fleet, as the process is not a short one. Even if assembling the fleet is faster than the travel time or terraforming process, the long timeline only adds to uncertainty and distrust. There are a lot of solutions we can imagine, so let's walk through a few scenarios to explore our musings. Each will have its own pros and cons, and degree of feasibility, which you are welcome to discuss in the comments section of the episode, though we are intentionally making them up to avoid drawing parallels to any modern or recent examples that might get touchy. Our first example is set in the 24th century, where a civil war in the small nation of Random Land on Earth, fought between two distinct cultures, the Randomites and the Landites, ends with an enforced peace brokered by neighboring nations. As part of the settlement, these nations agree to help fund two separate missions, one for each faction, to establish space habitats on opposite sides of the asteroid belt. Each habitat is built into a large asteroid, with ample room for expansion and the potential for additional habitats to be constructed over time. People are free to move and join either faction's habitat, or remain on Earth to support a more peaceful and integrated culture. The idea is that those most opposed to coexistence will be the first to board the ships, while those who remain behind but later grow discontented can choose to make the journey at a later date. One can imagine folks arriving later quite loving the place, or a tourist trade to it, but one can also imagine them becoming disillusioned with their previously assumed ideal society, or the folks already there may view future migrants from their homeland as second-class citizens, or in some way tainted. Of course, another possibility is that the factions may ultimately be unhappy with the settlement altogether, and retaliate against the nations that enforced it, or try to retake their homeland on Earth for their singular culture or government. Our next example is that in 2492, an interstellar mission to a system with 5 potentially habitable planets gains funding and support from a 5-nation alliance on Earth. Each nation is relatively small, eager for the prestige of establishing a colony, but constrained by limited resources. To resolve this, they agree to collectively fund the mission, with the right to choose which planet to settle based on the proportion of resources each contributes. The nation providing the most support gets the first pick, and so on. As the fleet is built and deeper scans of the target system are conducted, they uncover not just a wealth of good-sized asteroids and moons, but an entire 6th planet, a world with conditions that are surprisingly decent for colonization. Meanwhile, smaller groups, including private investment firms and independent settlers, begin to buy up rights to some of the asteroids and moons, planning to ride along with the fleet to establish their own footholds. Every additional settlement effort makes the entire cost per colonist lower, and the overall odds of success higher. Among the prospective settlers is a growing ideological movement called New Sun. Though small, its followers are passionate and gaining traction in several countries. They propose partially funding the colonization of the 6th planet, offering to take on the cost of settlement. Several nations where a new sun is present, but unpopular with the powers that be, agree to cover part of the expense, on the condition that the movement and its leadership travel on a colony ship paid for and operated by the other countries. Another example, in the early 26th century, the new Oceania region of Earth was governed by an authoritarian regime that experienced a violent successionist uprising. To avoid an outright civil war, the regime proposes an unusual solution. The rebels are granted autonomy, but must relocate to a distant asteroid cluster beyond Pluto's orbit. The rebels accept, viewing this as a chance to escape tyranny and establish their own society. The colony thrives initially, leveraging its self-reliance and unity. However, over time, factions emerge within the colony, some advocating for reconciliation with Earth, others pushing for complete independence, and others for the buildup of military assets to liberate New Oceania. Tensions rise, leading to debates over whether to seek peace, isolation, or prepare for a possible future conflict with their former oppressors. In this next scenario, during the 23rd century, advancements in genetic engineering lead to the creation of a subclass of humans specifically modified for low gravity and high radiation environments. These individuals play a crucial role in establishing asteroid mines and moon settlements to support a growing interplanetary civilization hungry for raw materials. As these settlements become more established, unmodified humans begin moving in and diversifying the local economies and cultures beyond mining. By the 27th century, societal backlash against genetic modification has grown, and most of these original settlements are now majority unmodified. The genetically modified pioneers face discrimination and feel increasingly out of place in their own homes, often disparagingly called loonies or belters. While some sympathize with their plight, others would rather see them gone. To resolve the tensions, they offer a one-way ticket to a distant star system, rich in moons and asteroids, well suited to their engineered physiology and the culture that they developed. The colony ships, being cheaper to construct due to their lower spin gravity requirements and a reduced need for radiation shielding, double as ore freighters to return raw materials to Earth's ever-growing orbital habitats. Over generations, the outcast colonies developed distinct cultures, celebrating their genetic modifications as symbols of resilience and ingenuity. They maintain loose and peaceful, if somewhat chilly, relations with Earth, sending reports and modest shipments of ore in exchange for technological updates and other information. A couple of centuries into their exile, a fleet arrives carrying new exiles, uplifted canines, genetically enhanced dogs sent with Earth's blessing and assistance, seeking to integrate into their society. Reactions across the colony wards vary. Some are open to the idea, seen as an opportunity to grow and evolve their civilization. Others are less enthusiastic, feeling uneasy about sharing their society with the newcomers. Still, other colonies view their arrival as an insult or even a potential threat, leading to tensions that could redefine their relationship with both Earth and each other. A new scenario. By the 28th century, a major religious order on Earth splinters into two factions after a heated doctrinal dispute. Rather than risk ongoing conflict, the leaders agree to send one faction to colonize a distant star system on the condition that the remaining faction helps fund the journey. The departing faction views this as an opportunity to practice their faith without interference, while the remaining group hopes the separation will prevent further strife. As their colony grows, their isolation intensifies their doctrinal purity, but also creates challenges in adapting to the practical demands of survival. Meanwhile, members of the faction left on Earth debate whether to reconnect with their exiled brethren, fearing that centuries of separation may have deepened the ideological divide beyond repair. In our final scenario, in 2235, Earth's overcrowded prison system became both unsustainable and unpopular. A bold new policy is enacted. Convicted criminals who hadn't committed particularly heinous crimes are offered the chance to settle a large near-Earth asteroid. This asteroid serves as a trial project for transforming asteroids into interstellar colony spaceships. Once the project is complete, participants could choose to remain as citizens of the new colony, effectively exiling them from Earth, or transfer to another asteroid undergoing similar modifications. Alternatively, those who had completed their sentences working on these projects could return to Earth. Many embrace this opportunity, either leaving on a colony ship alongside other volunteers to settle new worlds, or remain behind to help build more asteroid arcs. Some do so in payment for a greater stake in a future colony, helping build a few arcs then join the next one with a larger estate promised to them. However, on one such project, the colony's isolation began attracting rogue factions and smugglers. These outsiders brought contraband and facilitated secret communications with Earth, sparking internal debates. Some colonists want to maintain the settlement as a haven for outcasts, while others push for transitioning into a legitimate and recognized colony, creating a new dynamic that could shape the colony's future. Obviously, in that last case, much would depend on the types of criminals being sent there, whether they were primarily political dissidents or had committed other crimes, and of what nature. We explored these scenarios more in depth a few years back in our Prison Space Colonies episode, which kicked off our Rogue Civilization series. That episode also delved into the concept of building a prison in space, imagining an Alcatraz-like equivalent in orbit. In all of these examples, we can imagine countless minor nuances shaping the nature of the colony. I'm primarily envisioning them from the perspective that neither the exiled nor the exilers are caricatures of mustache-twirling villains or heroic figures, but rather complex and multifaceted individuals or political bodies navigating difficult circumstances. Your mileage may vary on how you're imagining them, and that's good if it does, as they're all just thought prompts for imagining how exiled colonies might originate and behave. Do I think exiled colonies will occur? Yes. I believe they will likely be one of the more common sources of colonists, and we can look to history as proof of this. However, in most cases, I expect it will be in the form of voluntary exile or quasi-voluntary situations, where individuals are decidedly unwelcome but not technically forced to leave. I also suspect that in most instances, entire fleets won't consist solely of exiles, nor will all the exiles on a fleet necessarily be leaving for the same reasons. Ultimately, while humans are natural explorers, driven by the desire to see what lies beyond the next horizon and to create something new, this often pairs with an equally strong urge to leave where they currently are, whether out of dissatisfaction, necessity, or sheer restlessness. The push to get away can sometimes be just as powerful as the pull to go somewhere else. I believe exiled colonies will likely be one of many threads weaving humanity's future in space. Whether they represent second chances, acts of desperation, or tools of division, they will at least reflect the complexity of our nature and history. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below.